Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're breaking down one of the most crucial topics for your GCSE history exam, the turbulent years between the two world wars, a time when the world went from celebrating peace to hurtling towards another, even bigger conflict.
So let's just dive right in. We're going to explore the central question here. How on earth did the war to end all wars fail so spectacularly that it just paved the way for World War II only 20 years later? It's a huge question, and we're going to unpack it together.
And to make this super clear for your revision, we're structuring this exactly like the AQA specification. We'll cover the unstable peace, the powerless League of Nations, and then the march to war. And of course, we'll wrap up with a final revision checklist to make sure it all sticks. Okay, part one, an unstable peace. So picture this, it's 1919. The leaders of the world are in Paris, and they have this monumental task of building a lasting peace. But right from the get-go, they all wanted completely different things, and that created massive cracks in the very foundation of that peace. And here's the core of the problem. You've got this clash of visions. On one side, you have America's President Wilson. He's the idealist, dreaming of a fair, just peace based on his famous 14 points. But then, on the other side, you've got Clemenceau from France and Lloyd George from Britain. I mean, their countries had been absolutely devastated by the war. They weren't thinking about ideals, they wanted security, they wanted revenge, and they really, really wanted Germany to pay for it all.
And this is what they came up with, the Treaty of Versailles. Now, for your exam, you absolutely have to know these 4 key areas. First up, the War Guilt Clause. Germany had to accept 100% of the blame. Second, crippling reparations. That's the $6.6 billion. Third, their military was just gutted. And finally, they lost all their colonies and huge chunks of valuable land in Europe. This was not a discussion, it was a punishment. And that leads us to this crucial term, diktat. You see, for the Germans, this wasn't a treaty they'd agreed to. It was a diktat, a dictated peace. They had zero say in it. They were just told to sign on the dotted line. And that deep, burning sense of humiliation would fester in Germany for years and years to come. So let's move to part 2 and see how this builds. To try and enforce this fragile peace, Wilson's big idea was put into action, the League of Nations. It was supposed to be this global club where countries could sort out their problems without going war. I mean, on paper, a brilliant idea for collective security. But in reality, it was a mess from the very start. And this timeline just shows you its hit-and-miss record so perfectly. Yeah, in the 1920s, it had a few small wins with smaller countries. But look at what happens in the 1930s, when the big aggressive powers like Japan in Manchuria and Italy in Abyssinia decided to act, the League just crumbled. It was completely powerless when it really, really mattered. So why did it fail so badly? Well, here are the key reasons. First, and this is a big one, the USA, the most powerful country in the world, never even joined. It also had no army of its own to enforce its decisions. And because every member had to agree on everything, it was often just paralyzed. Add in the Great Depression, which made everyone look after themselves, and you got a recipe for disaster. Ambitious dictators just laughed at it. It was a toothless tiger.
Okay, part 3, the march to war. So, the failure of Versailles to create a fair peace and the failure of the League to enforce any kind of peace left this huge power vacuum in Europe. And there was one man, Adolf Hitler, who was more than ready to step in and exploit it. And as soon as he had power, Hitler started taking these huge calculated risks, just tearing up the Treaty of Versailles piece by piece. You can see it on the timeline. He starts rearming, he marches troops back into the Rhineland, he unites with Austria. Each one was a massive gamble. And every single time, the Allied powers just watched and did absolutely nothing. So what were the Allies doing? Well, they were following a policy you have to know inside and out for your exam: appeasement. And the idea, championed by Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, was pretty simple. Just give Hitler what he says he wants. The hope was that by making these concessions, he'd eventually be satisfied, and everyone could avoid another horrible war. Now, it's really important to get both sides of this debate. The arguments for appeasement were, well, Britain wasn't ready for a war and needed time to rearm. Plus, a lot of people actually felt the Versailles Treaty had been too harsh on Germany. But the arguments against it were powerful. Critics said it just encouraged Hitler, that every time you gave in, he'd just demand more. It was a massive missed opportunity to stop him when he was still relatively weak. And then came the final, jaw-dropping twist in the story, the Nazi-Soviet Pact. In August 1939, Hitler and Stalin,
the two most bitter enemies on the planet signed a non-aggression pact. This was it. This was the green light Hitler needed. It meant he could invade Poland without having to worry about fighting the Soviet Union at the same time. A week later, his tanks rolled into Poland, and the Second World War had begun.
Okay, wow. That was a whirlwind tour through 20 very chaotic years. So let's lock in that knowledge with a quick-fire revision checklist of the absolute essentials you need to take into your exam.
Right, the key ideas. Make sure you can explain why Versailles was seen as a diktat, know the key failures of the League, like Manchuria and Abyssinia, be able to list Hitler's main steps to war, understand the arguments for and against appeasement, and finally, know why that Nazi-Soviet pact was the final trigger.
And don't forget the people. You need to know the key players whose choices shaped this entire era. We're talking about Wilson and his idealism, Chamberlain and his appeasement, the aggressors like Hitler and Mussolini, and of course the cynical deal-making of Stalin.
So the biggest thing to take away from all this isn't just what happened, but why it happened. And to leave you with a classic exam-style thought to chew on, who was most to blame for the war? Was it the aggression of Hitler, the weakness of the League, that flawed Treaty of Versailles, or was it the policy of appeasement? Who do you think was ultimately responsible?